Honestly, it's kind of like looking in the mirror of Erised. It is the final Sunday of the month, you know what that means, it's style study time. And today's video was requested twice and I'm so glad that it was because this is a style study that I've wanted to do for a very long time. So massive thank you to Sorcery of Tones and Megan Draws for requesting this video because today we're going to take a look at the extremely advanced, gorgeous character art of popular illustrator Charlie Bowater. If this is your first style study, I highly recommend listening to this quick intro that's about to follow. But if you're an OG subscriber, thanks so much for being here again. You already know what a style study is. You can go ahead and skip to part 1. The timestamps are in the video description, as well as you'll find chapter markers on the seek bar somewhere. If you're new here, hi, welcome. I am so glad you're here because today we're gonna level up your art by about 1,000%. I'm Srish and Style Study is a series I do every final Sunday of every single month on this channel. Style studies are where we take a look at some of our favorite contemporary artists, analyze their work and see what we can learn from it. Keyword, learn. We are not trying to plagiarize anyone's style or art, we're only here to learn. I usually structure these in 3 parts. In part 1, we'll take a look at Charlie's work, analyze her style and see what we can learn from it. Part 2 will be a study of one of Charlie's original paintings. The reference I've chosen today is this one. And in part 3, we'll apply everything that we learned today to an original painting of our own. As always, if you enjoyed this series and want to watch more of it, I will have a playlist linked in the cards in the description, as well as in the end screen of this video. I think we have about 17 more of these, so you can totally binge it. And if you do learn something from this video, I'd super appreciate like, comment, subscription, and share because it really helps the channel out so much, and it helps me reach more artists so we can all level up together. But yeah, this is going to be a slightly longer one, so whenever you're ready, grab a snack, sit back, and let's dive into another style study featuring Charlie Bowater. Charlie Bowater is a 33-year-old illustrator and an art industry veteran from the UK. According to her website, she is a full-time lead concept artist and illustrator and was awarded the Goodreads Best Young Adult Book Cover in 2017 for her art on Margaret Rogerson's book An Enchantment of Ravens. She has previously worked with big names such as Penguin Random House, HarperCollins, Simon & Schuster, and Bloomsbury. To me, her art feels like fantasy character illustrations, but not super high fantasy. Like, it is all deeply rooted in realism, but with a bit of a fairy tale flair. On the social media scene, her gorgeous character art has garnered her over 192,000 followers on Instagram and over 50,000 followers on Twitter. Though she does have a YouTube channel on here, she doesn't really upload to it anymore, but even so, her YouTube channel has garnered over 6,000 subscribers. But like I said, the majority of Charlie's work is focused on professional illustration in the creative world. I suppose you could say she is a bit of an art industrialist. Here's 4 key characteristics to Charlie Bowater's art. The very first thing you'll notice about Charlie's work is that every single painting is focused around the character. Yes, the character usually takes up the majority of the canvas, but there are loads of other compositional choices to show us that the way she creates these paintings is by building the entire scene in such a way that you're pretty much always being drawn to the character's face. For instance, you have a lot of leading lines that point directly to the character's face, no matter how simple or complex the scene may be. So here, for example, the character's hair is directly coming in from the edges of the frame, literally pointing towards her face. Here, the silhouettes of the dilapidated structures are directly leading towards the two characters in the middle. Another compositional element she uses often is framing, in both obvious and subtle ways. Here, for instance, the lily pads are placed in such a way that you almost see them as an outline, and as a result, it makes you feel like what's really important in this painting is what's inside that frame of lily pads, which is the character's face. This one's a lot more subtle because there aren't any solid elements that frame the character. However, if you look at the brush strokes in the background, you'll notice that they run parallel to each other. Here's the funny thing about parallel lines. If you have enough of them right next to each other, they stop acting as leading lines. You see, our brain does not like monotony. If you deprive yourself of sensory input for like 15 minutes, your brain just starts to hallucinate. We physically cannot receive no new sensory input without going completely crazy. So when you have so many parallel lines of the same colors going in the same direction in a static image, rather than following the direction of the lines themselves, you are subconsciously compelled to move your eyes across the lines instead. And what do you have perpendicularly across the parallel lines? The face. It's the little things, man. Another very important way in which Charlie keeps the focus on the character is through the lighting. More often than not, you'll see that there is often shadow on either side of the character with a bright light directly on their face. You obviously know that that's effective because our brains rush to gain as much info from well-lit elements as we can, so that is another super quick slingshot straight to the face. I also noticed that most of her characters have either a dark outline or a bright rim light around their outer edges. We'll take a look at this a little later in this list. So you see, every single element of Charlie's paintings is carefully designed to lead you straight to the face. Alright, at the start of this video, I said this study was like looking in the mirror of Erised, because the way Charlie proportions her characters' faces is like, yep, that's what I want, both as an artist and as someone who has a face. There is something so elf-like about her characters, and it took me a hot minute to figure out what it was, but when I did, it felt like unlocking a whole new world of facial proportions, because when it comes to Charlie's characters, there is one word that perfectly defines every single one of their faces, and that is chiseled. So they might have soft features and smooth skin, but it is all overlaid on a very strong bone structure. You'll pretty much always see the big three of contouring. If you're familiar with makeup terminology, that's your temple, cheekbone, and jawline. These are super well defined, and although she doesn't place very dark shadows on the face, there's usually enough shadow and definition to make these three areas look really prominent and very well sculpted. Also, side note, this kind of created a theory in my brain that caused a mini existential crisis, but I can't suffer alone, so here's the theory. Does Charlie paint highly sculpted faces with a prominent bone structure because her own face is very beautifully chiseled with a strong bone structure? And then I looked back at my art and yep, sharp noses, rounded jaws, thick eyebrows. Now I can't unsee it and you can't either. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. TEDx, more like TED Existential Crisis, am I right? Please don't leave me, I need you. Okay, but seriously, when it comes to the facial features themselves, Charlie keeps it all fairly realistic in that the eyes aren't crazy round or angular or large, the mouths aren't way too pouty or small, and the noses have nose bridges, hallelujah. But the reason they still look super sculpted is because she doesn't cutesify their positions on the face. I know I always bring him up, but if you look at the way Ross Tran places the facial features, the eyes are very low on the head, the nose is tiny, and the jaw is round and pointy. With Charlie, however, the eyes are pretty much exactly where you'd expect to see them in a realistic head. The nose and mouth are proportionally sized, and the jaw, while really well defined, is still a realistic shape with a regular sized chin. And this is why I mentioned that her work is very deeply rooted in realism, because these characters are pretty much like you and me in that they look like they could be real. And well, you can only imagine how beautifully that helps you relate to the character, and boom, you have immersion. Here's the thing about the rendering in Charlie's work. You know how a lot of artists use very visible brush strokes to create that painterly effect, right? Well, take that and multiply it by 10 and you have a Charlie Bowater painting. Because yes, she uses very visible painterly brush strokes, but here's the thing, that is all she uses. There's no photo textures, no visible airbrushing, no filters, at least none obviously visible in the end product. Please remember guys, with this series, I specifically don't watch the artist paint beforehand, just to see if I can achieve the same end product through my own techniques. But yes, even if there is diffuse light in the background or blurred out elements, these are all painted by hand. Yeah, she hand paints the blurring, or so it appears. Like here with the mist around this character, doesn't that literally look like she's hand painted every single quantum of light in the mist? But that's not all. It looks like she even hand paints every single texture in the scene, such as fabric, metal, concrete, leather, and glass. First of all, I just want to know how, alright? Hey Charlie, how do you have A, the skill, and B, the patience to be able to hand render every single element in your scene without using photo textures or photo filters? I don't know the answer to this, but what I think I know the answer to is why she would hand paint everything. And the reason is consistency. You see, with every painting, Charlie does something completely new. No two paintings have the same characters, scenes, compositions, design elements, or even lighting. Each illustration is standalone and complete in and of itself, and yet each one is very clearly a Charlie Bowater illustration because there is a significant amount of consistency in the rendering style, among other things. So when she hand paints every single element in the painting, that is a stylistic choice that makes all of her art look like it came from the same universe, despite the subject matter being completely different. However, like I said, each painting is a standalone world in and of itself. So when she does hand paint everything in the scene to have the same quality of brushwork, it makes every element look like it belongs within the scene and like it interacts with all the other elements in the scene as well. Boom, even more immersion. So I briefly alluded to this earlier in the list, but if you look closely at her art, you'll see that Charlie's characters almost always have a very sharp outline around their outer edges. If the scene is super bright, the characters will have a dark outline, and if the background is dark, there will be a very solid rim light around the character's silhouette. And obviously you can guess why, it's because it really helps the character stand out from the background. However, there is another nuance to this that I almost missed completely, but once I saw it, it kind of stuck out to me loud and clear in every one of her paintings. If you look at the outer edges of the characters in a complex scene, there are no super tiny shapes. Everything is big and chunky. Even if the character has stray, messy hair, you won't see the individual strands stick out in the silhouette, but rather it will be thicker locks of hair catching the rim light. Why is this? Well, if you remember what we saw about the rendering just now, she hand paints all of the details, right? So that means even the blurring of the background elements is done with painterly brush strokes, and the only way to achieve this unfocused effect for the background is to use loads of tiny brush strokes that together form like a parallax effect. In other words, the way Charlie paints her background causes there to be loads of tiny shapes around the character in order to convey a blurred out, unfocused scene. But if the character is meant to be the only thing in focus, adding even more tiny shapes around the edges of the character itself would actually ruin the composition, because the edges of the character would just blend right into the background. And as we've already established, that is pretty much the opposite of what Charlie goes for with her paintings. So by eliminating very small shapes in the outermost edge of the character's silhouette, Charlie defines the character in such a way that it stands out really strongly from the rest of the scene. So to sum up part 1 of this study, here are the 4 key characteristics to Charlie Bowater's art. Number 1. Every element in the painting is designed to draw your focus right to the character's face, be it through lighting, leading lines, framing elements, or design elements on the characters themselves. 2. The characters have fairly realistic facial proportions, both in terms of placement and relative sizes of the facial features. However, the bone structure of the face is usually very chiseled, causing the characters to have a very sculpted, almost elf-like face. Number 3. Charlie hand paints every single element in the scene using a lot of painterly brushstrokes. She doesn't seem to use any photo textures, and even the lighting and blurring effects seem to be completely painted by hand. And number 4, the characters have a very strong silhouette, often including a dark outline or a very bright rim light. Where the background is complex, she avoids placing any tiny shapes in the silhouette just to make the character really stand out in the scene. So for today's study, here is the reference that I've chosen. It's called XXV, or 25 for those of you who still know to read Roman numerals. And I'm gonna be honest, this was a tough one to find because there are very few Charlie Bowater paintings that are simple enough to make for a quick study that still has a lot to learn from. That said, however, I had absolutely no trouble putting the sketch down because the proportions of the face are fairly realistic and are also pretty close to how I usually draw my own faces, so this definitely felt very familiar. Where it all went pear-shaped, however, was during the rendering phase. Now, you guys know that I love my magic brush, which is just a simple hard round brush with opacity and flow set to pen pressure. It is soft enough to blend with, but detailed enough to create interesting painterly brush strokes. However, what I noticed quite early on is that even my magic brush wasn't giving me that organic finish. It was all still a little too soft. So later I had to switch to this DG main brush from Dave Greco's brush pack, which is like a diamond shaped chalk brush but little more sophisticated. And then I wished I'd used this brush all along because it had that rough around the edges quality so that it gave me the exact effect that I was looking for. So important conclusion, use a chalk brush. I also ended up having to use this weird texture brush from a brush pack that I don't even know when or where I imported into my permanent collection, but I used this brush for that cool fabric texture in her top, and it gave me that speckled faux leather effect that looked pretty close to the original. And here's the study that I ended up with. Not my favorite one, but I think it came pretty close. So in the Emilyina study last month, I did this fun thing where I kind of did a draw this in your style challenge, except with Emilyina's style. Today I'm going to do that again because it was fun and different and I really enjoyed it. So today we're using this gorgeous character by Nikki Lee Is Me. She posted this as a draw this in your style challenge piece for her 84,000 subscriber thing. Congrats girl, it is super well deserved. But yeah, today I'm gonna try and attempt this character, but in Charlie Bowater style. I started off using a lot of leading lines in the sketch just to go with what Charlie usually goes for. Based off what we've seen in part 1 and 2 though, the biggest challenge here was hand painting everything. So that meant I had to paint every single dread, every ornament, every piece of fabric, and every detail on the pearls and even the Furby. But you know what? It was actually really therapeutic doing something repetitive. Kinda takes the conscious thinking work out of it and lets your mind roam while you render out repeating shapes and textures by hand. I did go in with a few texture brushes, mainly to get the frizz in the hair as well as some glitter on the face, because I felt it was all a little too smooth and flat. This was actually a really fun piece to paint because although in essence it's just a side profile headshot, there was so many gorgeous details in the original that I was definitely not bored whatsoever. Also with the background, I started off doing that parallel liney thing, but it looked a little too basic for me, so I went for mist and smoke instead with some stars scattered around, which by the way is a pretty solid go-to when it comes to simpler backgrounds because you can never really go wrong with some smoke and stars. Here's the finished painting and oh my god, I love this character so much. And there we have it, Charlie Bowater demystified. Thanks so much again to Sorcery of Tones and Megan Draws for requesting this video because I learned a lot from it and I hope you did too. If you guys have enjoyed this style study, then please do let me know by giving it a big thumbs up and leaving a comment below. Hit that subscribe button if you'd like to see more content, and come check out my Patreon if you'd like to support this channel and grab even more exclusive content every single week. Tiers start at just $1 a month. If you've loved this video and want to see more style studies, I will leave a playlist linked in the cards above, the description below, as well as on the end screen right here in just a second. You can totally check them out. We have about 18 others in this playlist, and you can totally binge them, so check them out. But with all of that said, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have, and I'll see you guys next week with a brand new video. Bye guys.